Hi, everyone. In this video here, what I want to talk about is the idea of strategy and making decisions that align with and support the strategy here. So you can see on top here, we talk about fundamentally two different types of strategies across a continuum. On the right side, you're trying to be a low cost provider, not necessarily the cheapest, but you're trying to be low cost versus the left side, which is differentiation, which says we're trying to be different on flexibility, dependability, quality, whatever. And the idea behind it is we have to make all these decisions in the first column that I'm calling issues here. So I'll scroll down so you can see some of those. Those decisions have to align with and support the strategy. And the reason we say that as an example here, let me show you one right here, is capacity or labor. Okay. Same decision, two different strategies. If you notice on top, on the low cost side, on the right side here, if we come down the capacity, we tend to have a capacity strategy that's called lag. In other words, we're not going to add demand until we know it's there. So we're always a little bit behind adding demand. Now, you may say, why would you do that in a low cost strategy? You know, you're losing sales, but the point of a low cost strategy is that there's no extra resources sitting around unused because that's costing you. So you're not going to add it until you absolutely need it. And that's something the customer is willing to pay for and run the risk of perhaps not always having the resources available for them to take care of them. They're willing to trade that off at a low price. On the left side, the differentiated side, lead means you're going to have extra capacity available all the time. So that if you look back up on top and think about your differentiation strategy, you're competing on, dependability or flexibility or quality. You want the resources available at the moment to be responsive or flexible or hit your commitments or whatever in that stuff. And customers are willing to pay for that. So same decision, two different answers depending on the strategy here. So let's go through and talk about these as we look at these. We kind of hit the first one here, the performance objectives, and said, hey, in terms of our goals, here's what we're typically going to do here. So on the low cost side, we're either trying to be the lowest cost or we're trying to be responsive or we're trying to respond with speed. Customer gets what they want out the door. And to get that speed, we have to take out waste, and taking out waste makes it a lower cost. On the left side, of course, quality, flexibility, dependability, agility, whatever. Second row, these are the common measurements that we would typically see going with each. So cost is turning over inventory as an example, and flexibility could be the agility to respond to changes in mix or changes in volume. Physical layout, when we look at that in the low cost side of the conversation, we're setting up a line that or a cell that is dedicated to continually making high volume, low variety products, and we can just crank them through. And so we've got one setup and we just keep making the same thing all the time. Whereas the left side under differentiation, we say job or batch or project. What we're saying there is the volumes aren't high enough for the appropriate capital needed to set up the physical line, as well as the demands are not repeatable enough or consistent enough that we're going to make things in jobs or batches. We're not going to set up a line for that. When we look at volume and variety, again, on the low cost side, high volume, low variety, so we can set up a dedicated line. And if we look on the left side, much lower volumes, higher variety. So things are going to move through a batch on equipment that's set up to do multiple different things. MRP scheduling, when we look at it, on the low cost side, when we say rate based, we're not going to create individual shop orders or purchase orders. The volumes and the products we're making and buying are the same all the time. So where a shop order and a purchase order Our authorizations to buy and build rate base says don't need that. Number one, don't know if we could keep up with all the paperwork, but number two, build to the rate and we're okay on the high volume, low variety side here. On the differentiation, because every job's different, we need to capture labor and materials for each different job. Therefore, we're going to create shop orders and purchase orders. So continuing down as we look at this, shop floor control, again, making sure we're working on the right thing at the right time. Since we're making the same thing all the time, we're just going to, as long as you hit the rate, control is okay. Whereas on the differentiated side on the left, batch type situations, we're going to monitor each individual shop order as it moves through each department and each machine and work center as it works its way through the factory, because we don't have that repeatability. Capacity, we don't know. I'll go to the left side on this one for differentiated. We tend to set ourselves up for infinite capacity because we don't know what we'll be making. So we got to be ready for the worst case, I suppose, and always have the equipment available. And on the right side, since we're making the same thing all the time, we can match the capacity to the production rate and the sales rate, the demand rate, and set up a finite capacity, and we always build to that. Organizational chart tends to be more flattened and responsive on the differentiated side. On the right side, where it's low cost, pennies make a difference in the process, so we're more hierarchical in our decision, less flattened, looking for decision making that maximizes or optimizes the cost. From a doing the work standpoint, the execution, when we end up looking at that, on the high volume, low variety, low cost side, we're going to pull in response to actual demand, versus on the left side, since jobs are always different, we don't know always what we'll be building, then we push forecast order shop orders out to the floor and build in anticipation. Now, the next 5, setup, work in process, queue time, wait time, move time, and throughput time, actually 6, all kind of work together. So let's start on the right side with the low cost. This is the pull system. And if you think about it, once we set up, we continue to run the same thing all the time. So setups are down, work in process is down because nothing's sitting around, waiting time, because things are moving in close to a one-piece flow. Things are not queued up in front for very long, nor do they wait very long. And the total move time, therefore, is very short also. Total throughput time is quick through the factory. We see the opposite on the left side with the differentiated, lower volumes, higher variety, batch type situation, more setups. Because things are moving in batches, there's more work in process. There's more staging in front of work centers waiting for their turn to build. Therefore, more waiting time afterwards when the batch is finishing. Moving it through the factory takes longer, and therefore the throughput time is going to be higher as well. Staffing wise, while we've got the lead and lag that we talked about at the bottom, it's the ability of the employee in all. So we'll bring these two together here, employee staffing and cross training. We want everybody to be more cross trained, and that's universal across everything. However, in the one piece flow mentality on the right side here, where the equipment is dedicated to run the same thing all the time, and an individual employee tends to be dedicated to a specific piece of equipment and process step throughout the whole day. So they're dedicated, versus on the left side, that employee has to be able to do multiple things and be flexible because they could be making different things all the time. Coming down to the bottom, then we're getting towards the end, the control standpoint, very much tied up a little bit with the shop floor control up on top and maybe with the execution. The controls on the low cost, high volume, low variety, pull system is by exception. So since you're building to a rate and you're making the same thing all the time, then as long as you hit the numbers and you're on track, everything's cool. We're only going to step in to control things if we have an exception and something fails. So it's by exception. Where on the left side, we should probably say traditional supply chain control methods, where we're going to watch and control every movement into, through, through and out of a work center into the next center where we'll do the same thing and we'll do that in, during, and out for every step of the operation. So it's a much higher level of control. Production strategy, since we're making the same thing every day, all day on the right side, we can level our production. We can make the same thing every day because the volumes and the demands are going to be there. Whereas on the left side, which is the push in anticipation, we could be making anything. Our production tends to be chase in that as demand goes up and down, our production goes up and down to match that. And to some extent, we're hesitant to level produce because we don't know what we're going to sell when, and we don't want to take the risk. So we're going to chase the demand. And finally, the organization, centralized versus decentralized, probably ties up on top of it with the organizational chart. In the low cost, we said hierarchical, more decision making, more silos, and the organization tends to make its decisions again in a more centralized way. So one person in purchasing is making all the purchasing decisions for all the factories to get the lowest cost and leverage the volume. Whereas on the left side, which is more flexible, responsive, customers willing to pay for it, got to be able to respond to the customer. The org chart's going to be more decentralized, flattened like we saw up on top. Decision making will be closer to the front line. The idea here is where before we had one purchasing person for 6 different facilities, now we'll probably have a purchasing person, sourcing person in each facility. They're going to do the purchasing, perform the purchasing and the sourcing as needed for their specific facility because they are focused on the customer and the customer is willing to pay for it. So we have to move that decision making closer to the customer. So you can kind of see the difference between the two. And again, the idea behind it, the themes, if you want to call it, is we're trying to stay aligned with and supportive of the strategy, low cost versus differentiated on the other side.